The moment the billionaire's fiancée slapped the maid across the face, nobody in that ballroom expected the maid to fight back. But she didn't. She simply stood there with tears in her eyes, while 300 wealthy guests watched the woman in the designer gown scream that she was a thief. Then the fiancé grabbed the maid's necklace and yanked it so hard that the chain snapped. The pendant hit the marble floor, and when the billionaire bent down to pick it up, his entire body froze. Because he knew that pendant. His mother had been searching for it for 26 years, and the woman wearing it was supposed to have died the night his father disappeared. What happened next didn't just cancel a wedding. It exposed a secret that one of America's richest families had buried for more than 2 decades. And before this night was over, the billionaire would discover that the quiet black woman he'd barely noticed for 3 years had been connected to his family long before she ever walked through the mansion doors. Stay with me, because the truth behind that necklace is something nobody in that room was prepared to hear. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now let's begin. The mansion stood on a hill overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges, black iron gates, and acres of land that seemed to stretch endlessly into the Maryland countryside. The property belonged to the Whitmore family. For generations, the Whitmores had been one of the wealthiest black families on the East Coast. Their company, Whitmore Capital, owned hotels, shipping warehouses, apartment complexes, and several technology investments. And at the center of it all stood 36-year-old Sterling Whitmore. Tall, reserved, extremely wealthy, and known in business circles as a man who could walk into a room full of millionaires and make every person there wonder what he knew that they didn't. Sterling was preparing to marry a woman named Sable Mercer. Sable was beautiful, sophisticated, and ambitious. She came from money herself, but not nearly as much as the Whitmores. She had spent the last 2 years making sure everyone understood that she belonged in Sterling's world. She wore designer gowns. She attended charity dinners. She knew the names of senators, judges, CEOs, and television personalities. And she had one obsession: control. Everything had to be perfect. The flowers, the table settings, the champagne, the music, even the people working in the mansion. Especially the people working in the mansion. That was where Amaris Bell came in. Amaris was 31 years old. She worked as a house attendant at the Whitmore estate. She wasn't the kind of employee people remembered. She didn't demand attention. She didn't tell stories about herself. She didn't complain. She simply appeared when she was needed and disappeared when she wasn't. She had been working for the Whitmores for almost 3 years. Sterling knew her as the woman who kept the upstairs rooms organized. His grandmother knew her as the woman who always remembered her medication schedule. The kitchen staff knew her as the woman who stayed late whenever someone needed help. But nobody knew much about Amaris. Nobody knew where she had been born. Nobody knew why she never talked about her childhood. Nobody knew why she always wore a small silver pendant around her neck. And nobody knew why she became visibly uncomfortable whenever someone mentioned the Whitmore family patriarch, Clarence Whitmore, Sterling's father, a man who had disappeared 26 years earlier. Officially, Clarence had died in a boating accident. His body had never been recovered. The family had eventually declared him legally dead, but Sterling's grandmother, Odette Whitmore, had never accepted that explanation. She believed someone had killed her son, and there was one other person who had always believed the same thing, Amaris, because she had been there. 26 years earlier, she had been 6 years old, and she remembered the night Clarence Whitmore disappeared. But she remembered something else too, something the Whitmore family had never discovered, something that had followed her for the rest of her life, a silver pendant, the same pendant now hanging quietly against her chest. On the night of Sterling and Sable's engagement gala, Amaris stood in front of her bedroom mirror and touched it. She hadn't worn it openly in years, but tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, She had decided to wear it. She didn't know that decision would nearly destroy her life. The gala began at 8. By 7:30, the mansion was glowing. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. A string quartet played near the staircase. Hundreds of guests arrived in expensive cars. There were celebrities, business executives, politicians, doctors, lawyers, old family friends. The Whitmores had invited nearly 300 people, and everyone was there to celebrate one thing. Sterling Whitmore was getting married. Amaris moved quietly through the ballroom, carrying trays of sparkling water and champagne. She kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that wealthy people often became uncomfortable when employees looked too closely at them, so she stayed invisible. Until Sable noticed her. Sable had been watching Amaris for several minutes. She didn't like her. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because Sterling sometimes thanked Amaris personally. Maybe it was because Odette trusted her. Or maybe it was because Amaris never seemed intimidated by Sable. She obeyed instructions, but she never begged for approval. That irritated Sable. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Sable's diamond bracelet disappeared. It was a rare piece, worth nearly $70,000. Sable immediately began searching. The bracelet had been on her wrist less than 20 minutes earlier. Then someone said something that changed the entire evening. Miss Mercer, Amaris was upstairs. Sable looked up. Doing what? Cleaning the dressing room. Sable's eyes narrowed. Bring her here. A few minutes later, Amaris entered the ballroom. She stopped when she saw everyone staring. Yes, ma'am? Sable stepped toward her. Where is my bracelet? Amaris blinked. I don't know. You were upstairs. Yes. You were in my dressing room. Yes, ma'am. And now my bracelet is missing. Amaris immediately understood. You think I took it? Sable laughed. Should I think something else? The room became uncomfortable. Sterling stepped closer. Sable. But she raised one hand. No. I'm tired of pretending. Amaris lowered her eyes. I didn't take your bracelet. Then prove it. I don't have anything to prove. That sentence made Sable furious. She walked closer. What did you just say? Amaris remained calm. I said I didn't take it. Sable's voice rose. You people always say the same thing. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Sterling's face hardened. Sable. Enough. But Sable had already lost control. She reached toward Amaris's neck. What's that? Amaris instinctively covered the pendant. Nothing. Sable grabbed it. Take it off. Please don't. Something about Amaris's voice made Sterling look closely. For the first time that evening, he noticed the pendant. It was old, silver, oval-shaped, and engraved with a tiny symbol. Sterling's face changed. He had seen that symbol before. But before he could say anything, Sable pulled the necklace. The chain snapped. The pendant fell onto the marble floor. Amaris gasped. She dropped to her knees. But Sterling was already moving. He reached the pendant first. He picked it up and stared at it. Nobody understood why he had suddenly gone completely still. His fingers trembled. Where did you get this? Amaris slowly stood. My mother gave it to me. Sterling looked toward his grandmother. Odette Whitmore had been sitting quietly near the fireplace. The moment she saw the pendant, she stood. Her face had gone completely white. Sterling, she whispered. He turned. Grandmother? Odette walked toward them. Slowly, carefully, she stared at the pendant. Then at Amaris. Then back at the pendant. That belonged to Clarence. The room erupted in whispers. Amaris's face went pale. No, Odette shook her head. I gave that necklace to my son when he was 18. Sterling looked at Amaris. How does your mother have it? Amaris swallowed. My mother said she found it. When? Before she died. Odette's breathing became shallow. What's your mother's name? Amaris hesitated. Lenora Bell. Odette's eyes widened. Lenora, Amaris nodded. The old woman stumbled backward. Sterling caught her. Grandmother, what's wrong? Odette looked directly at Amaris. Where did your mother live? Philadelphia. Before that, Amaris frowned. She never talked much about it. Please. Odette's voice broke. Think. Amaris stared at her. She told me once that she lived in Baltimore. Odette closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. Lenora was the last person to see my son alive. The room went silent. 26 years earlier, Clarence Whitmore had vanished after telling his family he was going to meet someone. That someone had been Lenora Bell. At the time, Lenora worked as a driver for the Whitmore family. She was young, black, single, and fiercely protective of her 6-year-old daughter, Amaris. Clarence had trusted Lenora, and according to Odette, he had been planning to tell her something important that night. But Clarence never came home. His car was found near the harbor. The police assumed he had driven into the water. No body was ever recovered. Lenora disappeared from Baltimore shortly afterward. The Whitmore family believed she had fled because she knew more than she admitted, but they had never found her, until now, or rather, until her daughter walked into their mansion 3 years earlier. Sterling stared at Amaris. How old are you? 31. His voice became quieter. Your mother told you about my father? She told me some things. What things? Amaris looked around the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes were on her. She wanted to leave, but Odette reached for her hand. Please. Amaris finally spoke. My mother said Clarence Whitmore didn't die in a boating accident. Sterling stopped breathing for a moment. What did she say happened? Amaris looked at the pendant in his hand. She said he was murdered. A wave of shock moved through the room. Sable stared at Amaris. You expect us to believe this? Amaris looked at her. I don't expect anything. She reached into the pocket of her uniform. She pulled out an old folded photograph. I was told to keep this until I was old enough to understand what it meant. She handed it to Sterling. He opened it. The photograph showed Clarence Whitmore standing beside Lenora Bell, but that wasn't what shocked him. Behind them stood a much younger Odette, and beside Odette was a man Sterling recognized immediately, his uncle, Malcolm Whitmore. Sterling's father had always told him Malcolm was out of town that night, but the photograph proved otherwise. Malcolm had been there. Sterling's hands began shaking. Where did you get this? My mother. When? 2 weeks before she died. Odette looked at the photograph. Then she whispered something that nobody expected. Lenora was trying to protect you. Amaris frowned. Protect me from what? Odette looked toward the ballroom entrance. From your uncle. A cold silence settled over everyone. Malcolm Whitmore had been dead for 9 years. He had died from a heart attack. For years, Sterling had remembered him as the kind uncle who gave him his first car. But now another memory returned. Something his father had once said, something Sterling had forgotten. You can't trust Malcolm. Sterling had been 10 years old. His father had said it only once. Then he had never mentioned it again. Odette began crying. Your father discovered that Malcolm had been stealing from the company. Sterling stared at her. How much? Millions. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because your father wanted to handle it privately. Odette looked at Amaris. Your mother witnessed the confrontation. Amaris listened. Malcolm attacked your father. The room was silent. Clarence was badly injured. Lenora tried to call the police. Malcolm threatened her. He told her that if she spoke, you would disappear too. Amaris's eyes filled with tears. My mother never told me. She was protecting you. Odette nodded. Because she knew Malcolm wasn't alone. Sterling's eyes widened. Who else? Odette looked at him. Your grandfather. Sterling stepped backward. No. Your grandfather knew about the theft. And he helped Malcolm? Not at first. Odette wiped her tears. But when Clarence threatened to expose everything, your grandfather chose the family name, over his own son. Sterling looked sick. "What happened to my father?" Odette's voice broke. Malcolm forced him into the water. The room seemed to shrink around them. "And your grandfather helped cover it up." Sterling looked at Amaris. "How did your mother get the pendant?" "She found it on the dock." "Why keep it?" "Because she said it was the only proof she had that Clarence had been there." Sterling stared at the pendant. 26 years. 26 years of believing his father had simply died. 26 years of his grandmother wondering whether she had failed her son. And now the truth had walked into their mansion wearing a maid's uniform. Then something unexpected happened. Sable stepped forward. "Wait." Everyone looked at her. She looked at Amaris. "I owe you an apology." Amaris didn't answer. Sable's eyes filled with tears. "I was cruel to you." Amaris remained silent. "I thought you were beneath me." Sterling looked at her. Sable swallowed. "And I was wrong." Amaris finally spoke. "You weren't wrong because you thought I was a maid." Sable looked at her. "You were wrong because you thought being a maid meant I was less human than you." Sable lowered her eyes. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Then Sterling walked toward Amaris. "I don't know how to repay you. You don't owe me anything. My family does." "No." Amaris shook her head. "I didn't come here for your money." Sterling looked confused. "Then why did you come here?" Amaris stared at the mansion around her. "Because I wanted to know whether my mother had been telling the truth." "About what?" "That your family knew what happened to my father." Sterling's expression changed. "Your father?" Amaris nodded. "My mother never told me who he was." Sterling looked at the pendant again. Then at the photograph. Then at Amaris. And suddenly he noticed something he had never noticed before. The shape of her eyes. The way she tilted her head. The small scar above her eyebrow. He had seen those features somewhere. He turned toward Odette. "Grandmother." Odette looked at him. "Is she—" Odette's lips trembled. "I don't know." Sterling looked at Amaris. "Who was your father?" Amaris shook her head. "My mother never told me." Odette stepped closer. She looked at Amaris for a long moment. Then she reached out and gently touched her cheek. "My son had those eyes." Amaris began crying. Odette pulled her into an embrace, and for the first time in 26 years, the Whitmore family held the daughter of Clarence Whitmore, not as an employee, not as a stranger, but as family. The engagement gala ended that night. There was no wedding announcement, no champagne toast, no dancing. The guests left quietly, and the story that had begun as an accusation against a maid became the biggest secret the Whitmore family had ever exposed. 3 months later, Sterling reopened his father's case. The investigation uncovered financial records, old police reports, and evidence that had been buried for decades. Malcolm had indeed stolen millions. Clarence had discovered him, and the family's patriarch had helped conceal the crime. But the most important discovery came from an old dock worker. He remembered seeing Lenora that night. He remembered seeing Clarence alive, and he remembered seeing Malcolm's car leaving the harbor. For 26 years, the Whitmores had believed they were protecting their family. Instead, they had allowed a lie to become their inheritance. As for Amaris, she never returned to her old job. Sterling offered her money. She refused. He offered her a position at Whitmore Capital. She refused that too. Instead, she asked for something simple. She wanted to finish the education her mother had never been able to afford. So Sterling established a scholarship in Lenora's name. Amaris went back to school. 2 years later, she became an investigator, specializing in financial crimes. She spent her career helping families who had been silenced by powerful people. And every time someone asked why she chose that work, she gave the same answer. Because secrets protect the powerful. Truth protects everyone else. As for Sable, the wedding never happened. She disappeared from the Whitmore social circle. But she never forgot that night. Months later, She sent Amorous a handwritten letter. It contained only a few sentences. I thought your uniform made you small. I was wrong. It was my own pride that made me small. You didn't need to prove your worth. I needed to learn how to see it. Amorous never responded. Not because she hated Sable. She simply understood that some apologies were meant to be received, not necessarily answered. And the silver pendant? Amorous kept it. But she had it repaired. She wore it differently after that. Not hidden beneath her clothes. Not tucked away from curious eyes. She wore it openly, because it no longer represented a secret. It represented the truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Sable? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.